Welcome to episode 37 of the David Binkowski podcast. Joining me today from Sports Illustrated Fansided is Atlanta Hawks reporter Pat Benson Jr. and from the Detroit Free Press, Pistons Pulse podcast co-host Bryce Simon. In this episode, we'll discuss the trade that ultimately sent Detroit's Saddiq Bey to Atlanta and what Hawk fans can expect. And in part two, Bryce joins me to discuss Saddiq's departure, how the Pistons season is going to date, and the incoming former Golden State Warrior and brand new Detroit Piston, James Wiseman. Let's get to that conversation with Pat and Bryce. Welcome back. For those of you who want to listen, Pat was on an earlier episode in the preseason where we went through every single NBA team and kind of took our take on each team and the over-under. And before we talk Hawks, I'm going to little thing. I did want to get your take on the blow-up of the Nets because the last time you were on, that was what led the episode was your soundbite saying, it couldn't happen to a worse group of guys or what have you. So I'm going to assume that the sentiment's probably around the same with the Nets now, being back to where they started from before all this started several years ago, trying to acquire Harden and Kyrie and Durant.
For sure. I love to see it. I love to see the Nets downfall, not because I have anything against the organization or the borough of Brooklyn, but it was just the most unlikable group of guys ever assembled in one location. And, a lot of talent, a lot of gain when you factor in James Harden, KD, Kyrie, and then switch out Harden for Ben Simmons later. But, just availability is the most important ability. Though for one reason or another, they were never on court. And, just glad to see it blow up. And it was just a really bad idea to turn over the entire organization over to KD and Kyrie. And the sad thing about it is every single team in the league would do it again. It would do the exact same thing again tomorrow if you can have just a shot at that much talent on one team. So really, it's like a case study. Like they need to teach in schools over the next few years. We need to figure out what happened. The 30 for 30 is going to be crazy.
I think so. I was thinking about it, and there was a point at which I'm sure you remember this. So there's a lot of changeover going on in the league right now, right? You got a lot of young talent coming in, which means that you really have to depend on some of these superstars. Like you said, it's going to keep happening until that talent rises up to supplant them. But the ownership changes as well. The owners were so dumb. At one point, the league was like, we'll give you amnesty, just you can cut any bad contract you have. And so the owners wanted shorter contracts. And that pendulum swung so far now into the players' side where someone like Durant, who just signed a 4-year extension, and now he's like, yeah, get me out of here. And the power is super far into the players' space now. And it's going to be interesting to see if it does ever come back the other way. But I think it's a direct result of that, of like Harden forcing his way out. I'm going to be unprofessional. I'm going to show up to an arena where I'm supposed to be playing basketball and fuck you guys. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to throw the ball away, not run back on defense. He kind of was the catalyst, in my opinion, of the first guy to be like, I'm just done playing until you trade me. And he got his way.
He may be the worst example of it. I mean, I'm trying to think about anybody else. I mean, he may be the most flagrant example. He would have the back warming, the back heater thing wrapped around his gut during warmups, and he would look extra bloated, extra heavy. He was doing everything he could to get out. But to your point about contracts, that's an excellent point. They used to have those long contracts, before, I guess, the last CBA. I'm not a big capologist guy, but yeah, and now they really have put the power in the hands of the players, and now we see a 4-year contract really doesn't mean anything. And also, it's really interesting. I was talking to a friend the other day, is draft picks really don't mean that much anymore nowadays. 4 or 5 draft picks for any top 50 player is a prerequisite for any trade now.
Yeah, if you look at, I was listening to. It may have been Simmons or somebody else. They're talking about LeBron And like, look at LeBron's first round draft picks throughout his entire career. Like, he's never really played with a good first round draft pick. So for the teams that he's on, he's like, just trade them away. They're worth more to other teams than they are to us. We can always get names. People want to play with me. They want to come to LA or wherever he's playing, Miami. So like, just get rid of the picks. They're basically worthless. And then there's teams like my Pistons where it's like, that's everything, because we can't ever get. We're never going to get we are banking on, like the Bucks have now. We are banking on Wembanyama. We are banking on some generational talent to get drafted by the franchise, because the odds of them ever signing in Detroit are slim and none.
I know, but I like what Detroit's doing. I like what Oklahoma City may be taking it too far, but I like taking that approach. Like, hey, we're going to have trouble getting free agents to sign here because we're not located in New York or on a beach. Simple as that. So we have to get creative, and I like that. That's the approach they're taking, and I feel like the fans are really patient, really knowledgeable. Like, they know what the deal is. And it'll turn around. The pendulum will swing.
Yeah, the attendance has been up. Someone commented on. I wrote a blog post on my website about the Pistons should not fire Dwayne Casey. Like, what coach could do anything with this roster realistically? And the proof of that being, the only player that got moved at the deadline was Sadiq Bey. Not even Bojan Bogdanovic, who's having a career year, so he didn't get moved. Because the value is not there. People aren't looking at the Pistons and saying, "Ooh, Nerlens Noel. We'll give you something valuable for Nerlens." Like, it's just not there. And I think there's a little bit of delusion with some fans. Again, I've seen it with the Lions for like decades. We're like, why aren't we winning? I'm like, you don't understand why we're not winning? Like, because the coach is terrible, the GM's terrible, the owners are terrible. Like, it's just top to bottom bad. In this instance, they're a little delusional about how fast they want this rebuild to happen and expectations around Dwayne Casey and what kind of magic he's going to perform. And it's like, it is not his fault that Cade Cunningham had a stress fracture. That is not the coach's fault. And you take the best player off the team. What do you have left? You got a bunch of young guys you're hoping to develop. That's what you have.
That's it. It takes every young player 4 years to even unless you're Luka or maybe Trey, it takes you 4 years to even get on that level. It's a long process.
I agree. So let's jump into your Hawks, because it's been an odd season, right? It's been ups and downs, and just if you could walk everyone through kind of where we're at, where are we at right now? Like, how do we get to where we're at right now? We had all the issues with Trey and possibly with Nate, and so talk folks through the Hawks season to date.
Yeah, I was ready to gloss over that. It's been such a dramatic season. They make the big splashy trade for DeJounte Murray, then immediately go on a bunch of a cost-cutting spree, take a bunch of cost-cutting measures to get under the luxury tax, and that obviously ruffled the feathers of a lot of fans, media. And really through the first 2/3 of the season, Atlanta's been very mediocre. I think they're just now one game over 500. And when you trade 4 first-round draft picks, for DeJounte Murray, you got to do better than one game over 500. As you pointed out, there was a lot of drama between Trae Young, Nate McMillan, and then a few weeks later, team president Travis Schlenk, the architect of the rebuild, he just stepped aside. And now Landry Fields is elevated to GM. Kyle Korver, who was kind of like in a pseudo coaching player development role, now he's in the front office. So really big shakeup. They played it pretty conservative at the trade deadline. Their big move was getting Sadiq Bey, and then we've been talking on Twitter for the past few days. It's like let's wait and make sure this thing goes through, because otherwise, one, we're going to be on a podcast, and two, Fields and Korver, they're out their big move. Like, that was it. So I'm interested to hear your thought, because I see Sadiq Bey like 2-3 times a year whenever Atlanta plays him, and he usually plays pretty well against us. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts from somebody who watches him every night.
Yeah, I think so. Just to recap, so there were rumors earlier in the season, as you alluded to, that Trae Young, Nate McMillan were not seeing eye to eye, and there were some issues there. It's interesting. I didn't know the part about Kyle Korver kind of coming into the front office. I knew that the one guy stepped aside, which was rare, right? Because he was a young guy, right? It was first time taking the job, and a couple of years in, he's just like, I'm out. So that was odd. John Collins being, again on the trading block, but it's just a bad contract. I mean, not that he's a bad player, but the value in that contract just isn't there. I think what you got in Sadiq Bey, well, first and foremost, you got someone who's durable. He does not miss games. He takes care of his body. He's on that level of psycho that you kind of need. Where the Pistons told him last summer, you should probably take some time off from basketball training because your body's going to break down. And like he's a gym rat. Like he'll get up shots after a game, then go to the weight room and like just nonstop worker. So he's got a great work ethic. That's the positive side. And I think what the Pistons saw is the upside there. And again, he's in year 3, so he's not to that year 4 where maybe he takes that next step. And that's the worry Pistons fans have, is that he's going to come back and bite us in the ass. But they also looked at James Wiseman and thought, well, the upside for a 7-footer who's that athletic and can do what he has shown he can do, not consistently. Again, he's only played I think he hasn't even played a full, and 60 games is all Wiseman has under his belt over 3 seasons. So, like Marvin Bagley, has injuries, and the Pistons are willing to take a flyer on him because they think his upside and his ceiling is just that much higher than what Sadiq's were. But I think for us, Pistons fans are quick to forget the last 2 years when they're like, well, why did we get rid of Sadiq? He was all rookie. And it's like, right. And the last 2 years, what he's tried to do is basically continue to evolve his game. So he was drafted to be the 3-and-D wing guy. And had that insane game against the Magic where you could see the highlights on YouTube and all that, where hits the fadeaway corner 3 and then runs back, gets the steal, and then hits a 3 after that. And then announcers go crazy. You see those moments, but they were rare. And after the first season, especially when he started trying to work on his game, literally, if you go back and look at the timeline for Pistons Twitter, people saying, what the hell are you doing? Like, you are a spot-up shooter. Keep doing that.
You're doing too much.
He keeps trying to get to the rim. He keeps trying to create. He's not a great passer. So if you're going to try to create, unfortunately, in college, he could use his body size to kind of like get to the rim and bully guys. Well, you can't do that against other grown men. And so that's one issue. Once he gets in there, then he's usually stuck. And if he has to pass out, it's one of those like pivot, look on the perimeter and see who he can get it to kind of moments, as opposed to like, I created space, beat my man, here comes the help, and now the right play is to kick it out to the wing or whomever. So I'm not sure if he was like, you just got Bogdanovich, that's my role, that's what I was going to do. And so if you like him more than me, then why don't I just work on my game and get the hell out of here? I don't know if that's his mindset. He never came across as unhappy, disgruntled, whatever, but he was one of the few names that was floated out there along with Bogdanovich that maybe he could be on the move at the deadline. But he is someone who 3-point percentage is way down from his first season. His last 2 years, he hasn't shot it well. Yeah. And I feel like he's trying to evolve to do too much. I'm actually interested to see what role do they have him play in Atlanta, because like I said, you compare him to John. I'll compare him to John Collins. John Collins is more athletic, so he's not really on that level either.
No.
But I'm just interested to see if he accepts a role, with the Hawks where he's that spot-up shooter again, because that's where he really excelled. And that's where he could really help.
And he's going to have to take a smaller role because Atlanta just invested in DeAndre Hunter this past offseason with a contract extension. So he's going to be coming off the bench. And really, I'm interested to see what the big picture is for Sadiq Bey, because he does have, the contract extension here in about 2 years, I think, will be coming up. So that'll be interesting. And then also just what role is he going to play? Nate McMillan is he notoriously he keeps a notoriously shallow rotation. He wants to keep it at usually about 9 guys. So that means a rookie who's coming along like AJ Griffin's probably going to have to take a back seat, or Jalen Johnson's going to have to take a back seat. So that'll be really interesting. And I heard someone point out that Sadiq Bey would be like insurance for DeAndre Hunter or Bogdanovich, who they are not very durable. So maybe that's it. But I'm really excited to see what he's capable of, and just how he fits into the Hawks' big picture and how he fits into Nate McMillan's rotation, I think will be really interesting.
Yeah, I believe they saved some money, right, by bringing him in because he's not super high priced.
Naturally.
And Detroit took on money. And then I think it was 5 second-round picks that the Hawks sent out to get him. So back to your point, like I've Yeah, they just some teams just don't value the draft. It's very clear, right? So they're just like,
Yeah.
we have our guy. What are we going to do with a second rounder? Just take it,
Which I get, like for every Draymond Green, there's 100 second round draft picks who just play a few years in the G League and that's it. And if Atlanta needs to fill out the College Park Skyhawks roster, that's not hard to do. So,
right.
like you said, if you think you have a guy, then go for it.
Yeah, yeah. It's the Draymonds are rare and the Cle Anthony Earlys are not. Shout out Sullivan County.
Yeah.
So now that there is a game tonight against Charlotte. This is going to record Monday and Tuesday, so the second part of this will come out after the first game. So I can talk tomorrow with Bryce Simon from Motor City Hoops / Pistons Pulse about how Sadiq performed. But there is a game tonight against Charlotte. It looks like there's some guys out, so maybe he'll get some minutes tonight, and so we'll be able to talk about that, coming up soon. And I'm interested in following how he does. From everything that James and the rest of the beat writers report about him, super nice guy, good locker room guy, good sense of humor. He comes off as very serious, but like I said, he's got that psycho in him where he's a little bit where he's like, I'm going to outwork you type of a mindset.
Need that.
And that's where the green in his hair comes from. Is the Joker is his favorite character. So that's why he dyes that little bit green. So he likes playing the villain. That's kind of why the Magic game, that 50 point, if you haven't seen the game, the highlights of that game, he just was lethal, just a killer in that game. And I think if we would have seen that mindset on a more consistent basis, and again, he went from a starter to the bench to like all different roles within Detroit. And I think that's also another piece that I've always wondered this about Pistons players, and why I'm interested in seeing him on the Hawks is when he gets put into an actual role where it's like, every night I need you to do this. That's a hell of a lot easier than like, hey, Cade's out again and Killian's not playing now, and you're surrounded with 4 new guys to play with again. It's like, how do you have any, unless you're Kyrie, who walked into the Mavs, on game 1 and just played like he has been there the whole season? That's very rare. And so I think some stability is actually, that's one of the criticisms that I have about this whole process with Detroit, is that there is no stability because guys keep getting injured, traded, all these things. And so there's the same commentary I had on Killian, which is like, how do you expect him to succeed? He plays 5 games and his hip's injured. Then he gets back on the court and another starter's missing. And it's just like constant change where when you drafted him that the ceiling was going to be Goran Dragic. And so you're taking a young player who's only played in Europe, didn't play college ball, and you're expecting him to all of a sudden. I thought Troy Weaver had a great comment about Killian in particular, which was, I need you to play more ball in the U.S. That was essentially what he said. You need to learn how to play NBA basketball, not European basketball. And so I think about that a lot with young players, and this is where, again, it scares me a little bit with Sadiq, because when there has not been continuity, which basically the last 2 years, then he hasn't done well. So hopefully he gets into a situation and a role, and Dwayne Casey even said it last week, I believe, that Sadiq is going to be a bench player. Like, that's his role. And so if he can hopefully come in, give you 21 minutes and
kill it.
Yeah, could go 4 for 5 from 3 and get get to the line. He did get to the line more this last season, way more than the last 2. So he's, like I said, the incremental improvements he's made in his game are not bad. It's not like he's training to do, like last season at the start of the year, we were all during the games on Twitter just like, what the hell is he doing? Dribbling the ball into traffic and getting it stolen, trying to beat guys where it wasn't there. Just, he was forcing it so badly. He got better at it this season. So the hope is that it continues, and that he continues to help, the Hawks now. But I'm wondering now, the Hawks are sitting at what, the 8th seed?
Yeah.
And so strength of schedule is one of the tougher
top
ones.
10. Yeah, top 10.
One of the tougher ones left. Where do you kind of see things playing out for them, whether it's play-in, playoffs?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think they're finishing?
I think they will basically tread water into the play-in. If they exceed expectations, they may walk down New York and Miami, slip in to the playoffs as a 6th seed. But really, I think we're looking at running it back again into the play-in tournament. Mm-hmm. And as long as you're in one of those top 2 seeds, I feel pretty comfortable that Atlanta will advance. Then you got a first round matchup against Philly or Milwaukee. Atlanta's played well against Milwaukee historically in the past. They just really match up well with them. So that's really the most realistic outlook I could imagine for this team. I mean, maybe Trey DeJounte really flip the switch and they meet the lofty expectations that were placed upon them when they first teamed up. But so far, they have not done that.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a little disappointing to give up everything they gave up and then be like, we're going to be in the play-in again. Like, shit, like, where do you go from here, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, both guys, neither of them were all-stars. They were both all-stars last year. So, that's disappointing. One of the few shining spots of the season has been the development of rookie A.J. Griffin. And again, we don't know what's going to happen now with Sadiq Bey because, similar position, very similar body build, in fact. So, that will be interesting because Griffin has really just been the silver lining to this season.
Yeah, I think that, the Nets are in fifth right now. They're bound to slide back. I mean, there's no way they're staying 10 games over 500 the rest of the season.
That's a great point.
They are a fun team to watch. I mean, I do like what they have. It's actually, like I said, it reminds me a lot of what they had before they blew it up and did all this bullshit with bringing in Durant and everybody else. But I don't see them. I can't see them staying in the top six. There's just no way. So that leaves the Knicks or Hawks essentially. I don't see the Wizards or Raptors jumping up into that. I wouldn't be surprised if Brooklyn slides all the way out of either to the tail end of the play-in or even out of it. And that gives the Hawks a chance. The downside is if they land at number 6, then they may have to play the Celtics, which is not exactly ideal.
That would not be fun.
If they can get to the 5 and everything stays kind of as is, and they get the Bucks, like you said, it could be a good matchup. I think it'll be interesting. Like I said, I'm interested to see kind of how things fit moving forward. I'm sure you probably heard some of these rumors, or at least some of the floated rumors about trading Trae Young, right? And I don't know if there's any that you've heard that have been intriguing to you, or any that you think are even remotely a possibility given what other teams may have.
Nothing serious. I feel like there's just a content machine that has to be fed. And we all know that, trade articles do the best, and trade podcasts do the best numbers. And, NBA is just soap operas for men and we love all the drama. So I feel like you put together Trae Young Lakers and you're going to get a lot of attention on that. Mm-hmm. I've heard really nothing serious about that at all. I could see one day Trae ending up in Tinseltown just because he's got that, or New York maybe, just because he's got that star power about him. And, there's that Clutch Sports connection to LA. But, I mean, that's down the road. A lot would have to go wrong for Atlanta. And right now it's just pie in the sky for a lot of other teams.
Yeah. I think the Knicks would be an amazing narrative to have him go to New York.
That would be crazy.
Have him play for the team that he was, that he took down essentially, and it would be.
And deep down they love him. It's just so. Just this weird love hate thing they have. We're all fighting our own demons, and clearly New York fans are going through it.
Yeah, I think the Knicks would be interesting. Again, far fetched, great for podcast fodder, great for clicks, but I'm interested to see how they navigate moving forward, given the lack of assets and that kind of stuff. And if they're willing to go over the cap at some point, if it makes sense to do so, who they'd move. There's just so many variables that, like I said, I think all they can do this season is hope for the best, stay healthy, and try to get into that top 6, hopefully up to 5. I think I'm trying to think where we were in the over-unders. On the over-unders for the Hawks at the beginning of the year.
Wasn't it 45 wins? 45?
I thought it was something. Yeah, it was somewhere around there. They're at 29 now with about 26, I think, left to play.
Yeah, that's correct.
So, 25 left to play. Mm-hmm. So 25, that's. Is it doable? Yeah, I think it is.
It's doable. It's a little bit of a reach.
Yeah, but they with the schedule they have, top 10, top 10 hardest schedule. I think they're over 8 as far as that. Now, one thing I will say again, in these rankings with Atlanta at the 8th hardest schedule, they still have the Nets listed as a tough team that they have to play. but that's legacy, right? So they're actually maybe closer to the middle of the pack, I think, than they would be closer to top 10 as far as hardest schedules go. I think it's doable. I hope they do it because I feel like Trae Young in the playoffs is like a mandatory. I don't want to see the play in. Nobody wants the one game's fun. Don't get me wrong, but like that's for the younger teams. That's for like the teams that are still figuring it out, or maybe they have an injury, so they fall into that. They're a little. I feel like the Hawks are a little more established. They've been there a couple of years ago. You don't want to see that backslide all the way down into the play-in again. At least
not at all.
Right? Any franchise wants that.
And I know you remember, and the NBA will never take games off the schedule, but back when the first round was best 3 out of 5, that was when it was most exciting. It really meant, it just made everything feel so much more important. The underdog, they win their first game on the road and everybody shits their pants. So oh no, like what's about to happen? So, I mean, it's unfortunate. They'll never go back to that, but that was for everybody under 30, that was just such a fun time. Best 3 out of 5 in the first round.
Yeah, there's some changes there, man. I'm waiting to see what happens when they bring in the in-season tournament too. How's that going to mess things up? And we'll see. Like I said, there's a changing of the guard for sure that's happening in the NBA. All these older players who are superstars, who are great, are not durable, right? So it's going to change over sooner than later. And I think that's where, unfortunately for my Pistons, we still have to go through Giannis. So that's why I don't understand anybody being like, we should hurry up and try to win. I'm like, for what? Are we going to beat the Celtics or Giannis? We're not. So, might as well keep rolling the dice and doing it the Thunder way and trying to get some assets. Try to get some assets. Yeah, bide your time. That's all you can do at this point. All right, Pat. Well,
no doubt.
Thanks again for coming on. And again, best of luck to your Hawks for the rest of the season.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me, and good luck to the Pistons. And I'm sure we'll be talking.
Sounds great. Bryce, thanks for joining me this morning. You're in the classroom, it looks like. Appreciate you joining me. Again, we're going through, we're before we started recording this, going through the kind of all the details of like who won this trade. And, before we answer that, I'd like you to tell people who don't necessarily follow the Pistons. I have listeners in Puerto Rico, listeners in South America, listeners in Europe, and in the U.S., New York, et cetera, that maybe don't follow the team. So before we talk about the actual trade and Sadiq going to Atlanta, can you tell people kind of put this Pistons season, in some kind of summary that makes sense for them, because it's been just all over the place.
Yeah, so the Pistons season was one that came in with high expectations, David, right? And maybe too high expectations to begin with. You listen to national pundits talk about like maybe Detroit's this sneaky team that could get into the play-in. And I don't know that I was ever that high. I don't know where you were at. But when Cade got hurt, then that stuff definitely went out the window. And I think a lot of conversations happen right now, and why they're so negative is because we forget about Cade and how good. I mean, there were still flaws in his game. It's not like he was perfect, but I think we saw flashes where we're like, man, this guy, even if you don't believe he's a number one, he's at least a number two. And so the Pistons season has been very disappointing because of that. There's been a lot of negativity. Like, if you don't follow Detroit real closely, the Lions had an incredible season. So like the fan base got really excited about that. And so the Detroit's, hasn't been a very positive towards the Pistons. And, Boyan, like, you have these veterans playing well. Everybody wanted them to get moved. Obviously, that's not what happened. And so I think everybody's just looking. For me, it's like, who's the individual players that are playing well? What's Jaden Ivey doing? What's Jalen Duren doing? What's Killian Hayes doing? And so that's kind of what I try to watch on a nightly basis, because the whole team construct just isn't great. We were talking about that. Like, the team's just not very good, and there's a lot more talent that needs acquired.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for, like, I was like, they could sniff a play in if things go well, right?
Yeah,
that was my expectation, and it was like, and if things go horribly wrong, then we'll be bottom 3 again. I mean, that's exactly what happened. It's just like you mentioned, there's a talent deficit that's there, and that kind of is a nice segue into Sadiq Bey, who we both like. We both follow the narratives and follow his storyline, but the reality was he's a role player. He's a really good role player on a good team. And that was not his fit with the Pistons. Like, we were rebuilding, like you said. So young guys need minutes, need to figure things out. And he took that time to do that, which took away from what he's really good at, which is just hitting knockdown threes, hitting those threes. So it's hard to watch. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Like, as a fan, I've tried to make it through every single game on League Pass, and there's a couple where it's just like by the half, you're like, I don't know if I can do this, man. It's like holding up that last beer with your buddies, and you're like, I don't know if I should do this, guys. Like, oh my god, like maybe we should just call it a night, So that's how some of the games have been. But Sadiq did end up getting traded at the deadline. It was a 14 trade, which is, that's pretty good to pull off, quite frankly. And have 14 who all got something that they wanted out of this. So let's talk about that really quick, because Sadiq is just one piece of that. So Sadiq goes to the Warriors, as well as Kevin Knox. Then Knox gets moved to Portland. Portland sends GP2 back, Gary Payton II, back to the Warriors, which was a point of contention because of the injury that he had that was undisclosed or what have you. And then Atlanta says, we want Sadiq Bey. Here's 5 seconds, right? That I get all, and then Pistons get James Wiseman out of that whole deal as well. So they take on more salary for a player who's been around, number 2 in the draft, but hasn't played. Let's just be honest. Like the guy hasn't played. So,
yep.
So Sadiq goes to Atlanta, and I'd love to hear, what you thought of his time in Detroit. What are the fans saying about him and about the move, and how do you think he'll do? The first game was last night. I watched the game. Started off 0 for 2, played 6 minutes as a starter, came back in later on in the second quarter and had a good game. And then in the second half, the coaches didn't use him, and the fans were screaming on Reddit about it. But I'd love to hear, like I said, what your thought about his performance in Detroit, and then how the fans take this trade.
Yeah, I've been a little surprised how negative the fans have been. And I still would like to talk to fans a little more in depth of, is it, and I know we'll talk about James Wiseman, and I want to talk about the minutes because you mentioned how little he's played when we get to that part. But is it that they don't believe in James Wiseman? Is it that they don't think you should have traded Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman? Is it that they just were so much in love with Sadiq Bey? Like sometimes I think all of that gets cobbled into one, like we just didn't like this move, but I would like to know kind of where it stands in terms of which aspect of that is it that the fan base doesn't like? Because I would say overwhelmingly, I've seen a negative reaction, and I'm only on Twitter. We talked about this, and I constantly have people remind me, like Vince Ellis, Vince, like Bryce, that Twitter isn't indicative of the entire Pistons fan base. And sometimes I forget that, like there's a whole section out there on other social media platforms or not on social media platforms in general, but I don't live in Detroit. So all I get is the Twitter interaction. But I think I'm with you in that I think Sadiq was probably capping as like a 6th, 7th man, which is a great role and a great pick at number 19, David. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I think a lot of fans are just terrified that he's going to become Chris Middleton. When he was drafted, that was the comp for his ceiling. Obviously that's a tough name for Pistons fans in general. And so it's like they're terrified he's going to go somewhere else and become Chris Middleton. I don't think that's going to happen. I think we've seen enough sample size of Sadiq to kind of know what he is. Yep. And I do. You had to respect his work ethic and everything he is. But we were talking about this. He almost didn't fit on a rebuilding team, even though he's a young player, because he just acts so much like a veteran. He almost needed to be in a scenario with a team that was competing.
Yeah, I was talking when I talked to Pat about him. I referenced. I said I like his game. Like he's a great spot up shooter when he just does that. But I said, he drifted away from that the last 2 years, and so it kind of became less tolerable. I remember early in the season. Even this season when you guys were doing the playback or the Pistons watch stuff, and Kuz saying like, "What are you doing, Sadiq?" Like or a crowd were screaming for him to just shoot it, like just catch and shoot. Life would be so much easier, And
David, I did the breakdown. I did the numbers. He's awful with the sidestep 3. I went and watched every single 3-point attempt he took. I hand tracked it, and he's not any good. And here's another thing. And listen, I think it's easy to trash on guys as they're walking out the door. And I'm not doing that with Sadiq. But I do think the report that came out about him not always taking the shots the team wanted, I think there's some validity to that. Go back to the game winner against the Warriors, David. He broke play. He broke the play. He didn't run the play that Dwayne Casey drew up in the timeout. He didn't run it. He admitted himself after the game, I didn't set the screen that I was supposed to. Now, he made the shot and we don't talk about it and worry about it. But like, if he did it in that moment, David, You're telling me he didn't do it in other moments as well. So I'm not here to trash on Sadiq Bey. I'm just saying, like, I do think there was some validity to that report that maybe he wasn't playing the way the team wanted him to. And then it's up to the fans whether they think that's right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and in the end, when you look at his ceiling, I was saying, I told Pat, you got a less athletic John Collins. That's basically what you got.
Sure.
Right.
Okay,
That's his ceiling. So, I mean, he's not a great defender. Of course, he had a block last night, just so, throw it in my face. But it's a better situation for him overall. We're both happy for him.
Yes.
And I think there's a thing with Detroit fans where they couldn't shit on the Lions. They got to shit on something, right? It's just, there's always, I haven't lived in Detroit in many years, but when I do go back, if I put on sports talk radio, it is the same topics, the same hate. We hate the quarterback. We hate we hate the owners. It's literally the same discussion. So I think there's just a thing that's like in there that's like, who's the fall guy? Who can we point the finger at, or who can we channel this at? He happens to be the guy right now. And, we all, I guess, credit the reporting from the beat writers, because we're all like, Sadiq's a great guy. And, we're all rooting for the guy. But, and again, we don't know these people. Let's be realistic, right? So we all fell in love with the narrative. But I feel like the Dave Chappelle player haters ball sketch from back in the day is always like, there's always a little bit of that with Detroit fans for me. Like, they got to shit on somebody. You can't just be like, everything's good, or I see the long term, the vision. It's always got to be something.
Well, it's Troy Weaver now. Like, all of us, this has happened pretty quickly with a lot of the fan base. Is Troy Weaver is under fire. And now I will say, I mean, we're only 2.5 years into this rebuild. And, I realize people are going to lose patience, because that's what we do. Like, we're all human. We all lose patience. Like, I'm with you. Like, I've lost a little patience, and I've had games where I'm like, man, I cannot check out. I got to stay focused. Because I've watched every second of this season. But that's the guy right now, it seems like people are starting to turn on, is Troy Weaver. And he has a big offseason, don't get me wrong. And this team does need to start winning eventually. But everybody's like, he's never made a good trade. Like, he does. I'm like, he traded peanuts for Bojan Bogdanovic. Like, what are you talking about? And Bogey's going bananas right now. He got Jalen Duren for, because he opened up salary cap space. He's done plenty of good stuff. Now, is everything perfect? No. And at the end of the day, not every decision is going to be perfect, David. He's going to make some mistakes. You just hope it's not the big ones. Was this a big mistake? Here's the thing. If Sadiq goes into Atlanta and is their seventh man and James Wiseman fizzles out, does that completely crush the rebuild? I don't think it does. Is it a mistake? Sure. Maybe it's a mistake. Just like getting rid of Bruce Brown looks like maybe it was a mistake, even though I question whether Bruce Brown would be successful on a rebuilding team. I don't know. But, it's going to come down to is Jaden Ivey hit? Does Jaden Ivey hit? Is he going to be good as the number 5 pick? Is whoever they get in the 2023 draft, is he going to hit? And when Troy Weaver takes his big swing, whether it's in free agency with cap space or a big trade, does that player hit? At the end of the day, those are the moves. Cade, Ivy, Killian, it already looks like didn't hit quite as what you would want, but this pick and cap space and big trades.
Yeah, there's a lot of like weeding out that has to go on. So there's going to be misses. Like, that's just how it works. And it's not a game of like, he's playing chess against 29 other franchises. And so there's going to be like this, all right, in this tier, we've got these 6 guys we're going to target in free agency, and they're going to fill that one role, just one of those 6 guys. And it may not be the guy you like, right? So, and that's how the young player thing that he's doing, where he picks up these reclamation projects, gives them playing time because they weren't getting it, and see if they develop. And I think that's there's not much more you can ask for that. I think especially when Pistons fans look at Orlando, just as an example, who's pushing for the play-in,
sure,
who grabbed Bol. It's a different setup. It's a different scenario. And we're still looking for, and I said this to Pat, unless you have someone who can one-on-one or whatever scenario beat Giannis and beat Tatum and Brown, unless you have that and as a young talent, then you just got another role player. And so they're all interchangeable at that point. So Wiseman, to me, that ceiling, we talk about him now, but I think Sadiq's fit, like you said, is going to be that 6th, 7th man, because Atlanta has a logjam at his spot, and so it's going to be Bogdanovic is not necessarily the most reliable player because of his injury. So it's insurance, right? So I don't hate.
Can I touch on that real quick, David? Just real quick. The Pistons may think they have a better player for that specific role already on the roster in Isaiah Livers.
Yep.
So like that's the other aspect of this. I'm not saying Saddiq Bey was expendable because Isaiah Livers is on the roster. I'm just saying for the specific role, which is, a 3-4 man off the bench that the Pistons need, I could make the argument that Isaiah Livers could fill that role just as good and maybe even better than Saddiq. And that's not a knock on Saddiq. I don't blame Saddiq Bey for trying to make his individual game better and go off the bounce and create an isolation. I don't blame him for that. Do you? I think individually you have to be selfish and try to be the best player you can be. Isaiah Livers has the upside to be a better shooter, probably has a track record, at least, and a history of being a better shooter. And I don't think it's even close on the defensive end. The only thing that Livers doesn't have, he's not tried to quite as strong as Saddiq. So I don't know that he's holding up against like strong 4 men who may take him to the post.
Yep.
And it's limited minutes with Livers right now. I'm just saying, I think you have a guy that, hey, I want to see him for the next 25 games and see how he fills that role. He had a double-double in his 1 game since the trade and looked pretty decent. So
I've loved him since Michigan. When he was starting there, they were a powerhouse. They were blowing teams out by 30 points every night on the regular in the Big Ten, non-conference, you name it. And then he hurt his knee. And it's been, okay, let's get that guy back again ever since then. So I'm with you. I think that his upside, like he was dominating college basketball. Like that's not nothing. Saddiq did well in college basketball. Livers was dominating it on a good team, but still, like I'm 100% with you on that one. There's a lot of opportunity now for him. Let's see what he does for the rest of the season.
Yep.
Speaking of which, and speaking of minutes and not playing a lot of minutes, James Wiseman, now a Detroit Pistons, now a Pistons center. He's got that freak athleticism and that kind of intangible thing that just Saddiq doesn't have. Let's just be honest. It doesn't have it. That's fine. I don't have hair. We all have something.
Neither do I.
Right.
I think we're falling off for the bald guys this morning.
Right. So Wiseman's fit in Detroit. Where do you see that? How do you see this playing out? Coming off the bench initially is my assumption because we have Jalen Duren. But yeah, I'd love to hear what you think about his fit and how the fans received the news that he's now on the team.
Can we talk about the minutes for just a second, David?
Absolutely.
I didn't even go into looking at the minutes with the anticipation of coming out with this. He's played 1,000 minutes in his career, 2.5 years in. If you divide that by 25 minutes a game, that's only 44 games. Essentially, he's played half of a rookie season 2.5 years into his career. Some of that is injuries. Some of that is because he couldn't get it figured out with the Warriors, which I'm sure we'll touch on it at some point. In comparison, David, Jalen Duren has already played more minutes in his NBA career than James Wiseman. Rookie Jalen Duren, youngest player in the NBA. He's already.
Happy birthday, by the way. I think it was his birthday the other day. Huh?
Oh yeah. Killian Hayes, 3.5 times as many minutes already than Jalen Duren, than James Wiseman, same draft class. Saddiq Bey, 6 times as many minutes as James Wiseman, same draft class. My point is, and the narrative that immediately came out is, James Wiseman's no good. He can't be any good. He sucks. He's not an NBA player. Listen, people may be right, David. They may be right. But don't tell me we know it for a fact. You can't tell me after 1,000 minutes of a player's career that you know for a fact that he's not an NBA player. And for especially the Killian Hayes fans that have preached patience for Killian because of the injuries, etc., they better not be saying that James Wiseman has no chance of being good, because it's a very similar situation for James Wiseman in terms of injuries and then trying to find his fit with his team. So all I'm saying, I agree with the ceiling. We'll talk about it. Just don't tell me you know for a fact he's not an NBA player.
Yeah, I agree. It's a sample size is so small over such a long period of time that how can you get any kind of continuity?
Exactly.
And with the roster he was on, I mean, he was literally like the 10th man, or worse. So when you're talking about playing with vets who have an expectation about your role and how you're going to play, and then you're this kid who hasn't played much, and now you're playing with some of the greatest players of all time. And if you're lucky, you get a few minutes a game with them. And so I can understand why he'd be tentative, not know his role, not understand what they want him to do. Like my understanding is that the staff, the everyone at the Warriors loved him. Like, he's a great guy.
Draymond Green is the most like, I'm going to tell you how it is no matter what with Draymond Green was giving him love. And so, and listen, if you don't respect Draymond Green's opinion, then so be it. All I'm saying is Draymond Green doesn't sugarcoat anything, David. If he thought James Wiseman was a big baby and wasn't any good and didn't work, he would have said it. And Draymond Green essentially said the opposite. And it's not just veterans that are trying to win a championship. Is there a better basketball IQ feel team than the Warriors? Like, they just play with such good feel and flow. And that's not necessarily what James Wiseman is great at, especially because he only played 3 games in college, has been injured. And like, that's not his thing. I wonder, he looks awful in terms of like basketball IQ with the Warriors. Detroit doesn't have the highest basketball IQ team in the league. I don't know that it's going to stick out like a sore thumb in the same way with Detroit. I think he may just fit right in. And, you know, that's, as you said, it's just hard to find your role and your flow with a team of vets that play basketball in such a beautiful way that the Warriors have done.
Yeah, that's watching the Pistons play and watching the Warriors play. It's just like watching, it's like you must be watching like billiards and basketball. It's like the 2 totally different styles and what they're trying to do. We do a lot of DHOs, a lot of pick and roll, a lot of one-on-one ISO stuff, which I'm not a fan of, but I get it. They're young guys. You want to see what they can do. So, yeah, I totally agree that it was a terrible fit for him. And I've talked about it. It's come up on my podcast in the past about, did the Warriors whiff on him? It's like, for the timeline, yes. Like, for their timeline, yeah, they kind of whiffed on that draft pick. So they probably got the guy they should have drafted in Sadiq, right? Could just step in and hit threes. He's mature. Can run your system because he's a high IQ player, I believe. So I think either way, you know, I think it's all going to work out. We've said this before. I think for every team involved, they got exactly what they were looking for, which is like, you know, there were no losers in the trade as of right now, until we see a sample size out of Wiseman. I don't think there were any losers in the trade, right? In players and teams.
Yeah, unless like, especially if GP2 would have been healthy. Like, you know, that's probably the tough situation. I don't want to call anybody a loser in that situation. Like, it's nobody's fault that he's injured. But yeah, I mean, that's what everyone's like, they traded him for nothing. I'm like, GP2 was really, really good for the Warriors last season. And I guarantee you they wanted to keep him around. He wanted to go make a little money. I think he's realized he made a mistake. I think there's even quotes that he didn't like it in Portland. Like, they didn't trade him for nothing. They traded Wiseman and got a player who helped them win an NBA championship and fits exactly into what they do. You talk about high feel guys, high basketball IQ guys. He's like 6'2", but he has such a good feel. He fits perfectly. Like, they use him as a pick and roll, short roll guy at 6'2", but he just knows how to play in within their system. And he's a great defender. And so they didn't trade him for peanuts. And there's also some money stuff that goes into all of that as well, with luxury tax and how theirs is, you know, 4 times as much because they're, you know, over the cap and all of that. So I don't think they just traded Wiseman as a complete salary dump and got nothing in return. They got a pretty high level role player for what they do.
Yeah. And he'll, however long that abdominal injury, that core injury is going to take to heal, as long as they can tread water until he's back, yes, that basically puts us around the playoffs. So if he's back for the playoffs, what a guy who's rested,
that's all that matters to them anyway, David. Yeah. Steph is out right now too, so they're not going to make a run for a home court advantage, I don't think, going into the playoffs. Like, I think their thing is, we at least got to get into the playoffs. We got to make sure we, like you say, tread water, and maybe we get out of the play-in tournament, or at least, you know, where we only have to win 1 game in the play-in tournament. But then we're healthy with Steph and GP2, et cetera, when the playoffs hit. And then we just got to hope everything clicks for us for that, 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch how the West shakes out. I think the East is going to be interesting too now, because the Hawks are a team that could ascend, because Brooklyn's definitely going to drop, right? So yes, it's everything's so fluid. This has been a really odd season, but now that the trade deadline's over, the dust is kind of settling. Yes. And we're going to see what we have. There's 26, I think, games left in the season, roughly. We're going to see what this is going to be, a sprint to the finish. Will the Lakers get it together? There's so many great narratives and storylines. It's been a weird season, and obviously all the ridiculousness with the Nets and with Kyrie and all that stuff. It's over finally. A lot of drama, and a lot of parody. But I think now we're finally at the point where it's like, all right, now we can lock in for the end of the season run. Let's see how our guys are doing in Detroit. Let's watch the standings and see who shakes out where. So we're not going to be in it for the playoffs or the play-in as Pistons fans. But my question is, what do you think this offseason looks like for Detroit?
Yeah, so I will say this Wiseman trade at least makes the rest of the games for the Pistons interesting. Now, I tune because I do like watching Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren, obviously, and seeing how they're playing. Now, Liver's going to get more minutes. Hami's been playing great. I owe Hami an apology. I liked him when he first got traded. I forgot about him in the offseason, and he reminded me what he does and what he can bring to the table. Here's the thing with Hami, and I know this isn't a Hami episode. Hami hasn't taken a three in over a month, David. Like, you talk about knowing your role, understanding your role, thriving in your role, and doing what the team needs you to do. Like, credit Hamidou Diallo. He said, you know what? I'm not a 3 or a 2. I'm a small ball 4. I'm going to stop shooting threes. I'm just going to be super athletic, energy, and do those things. And he's been really good. I'm like, it sounds silly. Like, who cares if I'm proud of Hamidou Diallo? But I'm proud of Hamidou Diallo for what he's done. But I'm excited to watch James Wiseman. We talked about it earlier. Like, the ceiling is higher than Saddiq Bey. There's no question. Now, the floor is lower because I don't think Saddiq Bey ever ends up out of the league or, like, he's always going to be a role player somewhere. James Wiseman, as much as I went on my rant earlier, sure, there's a world where he isn't an NBA player. I don't think it happens, but there's a possibility. The median outcome, we got this question on the live episode, is probably as your backup big, like the third big, the first guy off the bench. But I think the ceiling is still an NBA starter. Maybe not a star, maybe not even an all-star, although I think it's still a possibility, but at least an NBA starter. Now, if he can do that next to Jalen Duren, that might be a whole segment of a conversation. But
yeah, if you got a Clint Capella type who can maybe try to learn how to shoot threes.
Yeah.
And is super athletic and you think about the team with the motors they have, right? With the bodies they have. And I don't know what the fit would be necessarily, but if you had Hami, Ivy, let's say Duren, Wiseman, and I don't care who the fifth person is because they're going to have to sprint with those guys. That's exciting basketball. That is exciting basketball.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
I'll take that. I'll take that over watching one-on-one ISO bullshit, for 5 minutes where we score 2 points, and then Bogey comes back in off the bench and puts up 12 and a quarter, so we're not down 30.
David, I love put Cade on the floor with that team, get him the ball, and then let those other dudes be athletic. Now, spacing is a little bit of an issue, but if you play fast in transition, which is something I've said for 2.5 years now, and I just, I don't know where they're at in the league. I think they should be top 5 in the league. But anyway, push the ball, let those guys get out in space, and transition creates space naturally because you're using the full length of the court. But one thing that I think Pistons fans need to remember, they were so mad that Troy Weaver had not, put together a team with any athleticism a couple years ago. In 12 months, Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Marvin Bagley III, James Wiseman. Like, he went out and did. And the other thing was, there's no lob threats. Again, Jalen Duren, Marvin Bagley III, James Wiseman. And the shooting isn't great, but you at least have a couple vets. Why are Boyan and Burke still on this roster? And I would have been in favor of trading Boyan at the right price. I just want to say that. But why are these 2 vets on the roster? Because they're the 2 best shooters on the roster. And could you imagine if those 2 guys weren't around, what the spacing would be like? So, I do think some of the things we have to remember that as a fan base, and I'm guilty of this as well. We said more athleticism, pick and roll lob threat, shooting. Well, maybe not to the extent we've wanted, but Troy Weaver has gone and tried to acquire that stuff a little bit.
Yeah, I think big picture perspective is Bucks have Lopez and Giannis.
Yep.
Not small men.
No.
The Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Not small men.
Nope.
So Allen and Mobley, look at what Orlando's doing. Not small men.
Even the Knicks, David, and I know maybe you don't think the Knicks are a threat, but Randall and Mitch Rob, those are not small men.
Yep.
And it's, you wonder maybe Troy Weaver is seeing this and trying to get out ahead of it, knowing, because who's the number 1 pick in the draft? Victor Wembanyama, another not small man who is going to play on the floor with another not small man because Victor is extremely skilled. Victor, everybody calls him a center. That's fine. If we want to call him a center, fine. I don't care. he can play with any type of other big man you want. He can play with a non-stretch, non-3-point shooting big. You can put him on the floor with any other big man in the league, and it's going to work. And so wherever he ends up, and if he's generational like a lot of us think, that's a team you're going to have to beat to get to a conference finals, to the NBA championship, to win the NBA championship. So I don't know that Troy Weaver's crazy trying to figure this out with two bigs.
No, I think it's the future. I think it's literally the future of the league. We don't have Steph. We don't have Luka. So let's just put some really big bodies at the rim who are skilled and can block shots and do what Cleveland's doing, and then get our Donovan Mitchell type. If Cade's not it, or we need somebody else, then we'll get that other person. But I think that he's looking at it in a long-term perspective. And again, game by game, minute by minute, substitution by substitution, fans get frustrated because they don't get it, right? Yeah. They don't get it. So I get it. It's the same. They have to have a scapegoat. They have to have someone to hate on. Now it's Troy's turn. It was Killian's for a while, right? It's always somebody. There's never peace and harmony. And let's look at long term and sip our coffee and enjoy the season and watch these guys develop. Can't do that. There's got to be some hate in there somewhere, right?
I feel good for Coach Casey because at least they're off Coach Casey's back for a little bit. Now, eventually it'll be his fault again, but they're off his back a little bit and on to Troy Weaver. And I think you were going to ask me about this offseason. I think the thing that I would like to see, I think the thing we will see, David, depending on how Isaiah Livers plays, but even with how Isaiah Livers plays, I think we'll see a revamp, or I think we'll see the wing position get a lot of attention. Now, this also depends a little bit on how the draft goes. If they end up in the top 2, it won't be a draft pick. But if they end up after 2, I think you're going to see them select somebody that's a wing, like a 3 that can score a little bit. And there's some different options there in the draft with Brandon Miller, Cam Whitmore, the Thompson twins. Amin's a little bit more of a point guard, but size-wise, he could be a 3. And so there's some options there if they fall out of the top 2. I don't know what free agency is going to happen. Here's what I will say. There's too much talk from the beat writers about Jeremy Grant for this not to be a real thing. That's all I'm going to. And listen, my co-host over at the Pistons Pulse is Omari Sankofa, and I say this all the time. Omari never tells me anything that he doesn't tell you guys. I don't get secret text messages from Omari saying, "Hey, guess what's going to happen?" He never tells me anything, which kind of offends me a little bit, but I understand. But he's talked about it on the pod. James wrote about it. There's something to this, David.
Yeah, shout out James Edwards, great work, and
yes, he does an incredible job.
And so I mean, I think until we know where we sit in the draft, it's all going to be who knows. But there are definite needs. Wing is one of them for sure. Bryce, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on today. Great insights as always. And if you are not following him, check the description. You can find out all the places where you can find him on Twitter, on YouTube, his podcast, all those things. But again, thanks again, Bryce. And looking forward to watching the rest of the season.
David, man, this was I had so much fun, man. This was a blast. I wish we could go longer. I know because of my schedule and everything, we can't, but I could have gone for another hour. I had a blast talking Pistons, just hoops in general with you. So I appreciate it. I've got to know you a little bit through Twitter and everything like that. And so good friend, and I appreciate you very much.
Hey, if you made it all the way through, thank you for listening. And be sure that if you're not subscribed, you do that, whether it's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, you name it. Also, be sure to leave a comment on YouTube. And if you're feeling generous, give me a 5-star rating on both Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'll see you next episode.